Moving on now to the aorist and future passive indicative, chapter 24. You are noticing a pattern by now. In each chapter we have various tense forms, sometimes just part of that tense form. Here just part of the aorist and futures, the passives. We've already looked at the actives, and so now to the passives, and you are hopefully familiar with the lexicon in the back of Mounts. I'd encourage you to note this. Hopefully you're doing that when you're doing translation work in the workbook or needing to parse a word. Look back there. And for verbs, the listing of these 6 forms. Present active is the lexical form, so then 5 follow that. Future active, middle, aorist active, perfect middle passive, and then aorist passive. And today, looking at the future and the aorist passives. Lord willing, you're familiar also with the verb chart now, and you've got it down. Encourage you to review this frequently, and as you do that, it will be solidified in your mind, and you'll need it every week. Every time you look at verbs, you'll need to know this chart, and once you have it down, you'll know. You see a word that ends in tie, well, most likely that's going to be a third-person singular middle passive voice of a primary tense form. So you're thinking present, or you're thinking the future perhaps. So know these, and you'll be able to parse much more quickly and read more quickly. Well, let's think about the first aorist passive. The various components of the first aorist passive are familiar in terms of what an aorist is. It has the augment yet, which signals a past time generally, and secondary endings. Aorist passive tense stem, that makes sense. We're in the passive. Tense-forative is something new. The first aorist active tense-forative, do you remember? Saw, sigma alpha. Here, they, theta and eta. But the perhaps most nuanced feature of the first aorist passive is that it uses the secondary active personal endings. Jump back a slide. So we're not in the passive voice endings. We use the active voice endings for the first aorist passive. New, sigma, and then the third singular can be absent or a new, men, te, new again, but even this will be nuanced a little bit. So you can see how that works out. Secondary active personal endings. Now let's look at a full paradigm here. The tense-forative, they. If you see theta and eta together in a word, you should immediately begin to think first aorist passive, just right away. They together, first aorist passive. And then look at your personal endings. You know that you're going to identify the active endings. Even though it's passive, the they will signal passive. Then remember, okay, first aorist passive, I use secondary active endings. Okay, new, sigma, void, or a new, men, te. But notice the third plural. We would expect a new, but it includes the sigma alpha of the first aorist active, and this is just an alternate ending, so it's son. Likewise, if you see sigma alpha new together at the end of the word, immediately you can safely think first aorist, third singular, and then if it has the they, you know it's passive. If not, you would know it's active. One thing that we need to think about as we look at the aorist and also the future is that there are certain stems that end in a stop. And when those stems come into contact with the theta, the tense-forative of the first aorist passive and also the first future passive that we'll look at in a few moments, there are some changes that take place, and these changes are primarily for pronunciation's sake. So if you have a stem that ends in a P or a B, a beta, and it comes into contact with that theta, it goes to a phi, eblephthain, in the first example there. Blep, from blepo, I see, thay, first aorist passive, eblephthain. Difficult to pronounce even here, even more so if the P were there. And the velar, kappa gamma key, the kappa and the gamma come up to a theta and they become key. There's no instance where a key itself would come up to a theta because that's what the alternate is for kappa and gamma. So dioc plus thay, idiochthane. Especially helpful for the gamma there up against a theta. The key is much easier to pronounce. The dental, as Mounce notes, tau coming up to theta is not in the New Testament, but the delta and theta, both of those drop, and the sigma takes over. Let's think for a moment about the components of the second aorist passive then. Again, the augment, just like first aorist. The aorist passive tense stem, still similar, but the tense formative for second aorist is just the eta. So first aorist, thay, second aorist, a. Still the secondary active personal endings. So first and second aorist still have the augment. They are secondary tense forms, but in the passive, you know they are passive not by the ending, but by the tense formative. Thay, first aorist, a, second aorist. And here's the paradigm of the second aorist passive indicative. Notice again the third plural, son, here just a son. If you see sigma alpha nu at the end of the word, you are safe to assume this is third plural aorist. If it's active or passive, or rather if it's first or second, I will know by thay or a. And I'll know it's obviously passive. If it's active, it won't have the thay or the a. It will just have its normal son ending. So the tense formative thay or a will let you know it's passive. Thinking about the first future then, it is also built on the aorist passive tense stem, no augment, and here the tense formative is thais. Luthesomai. You can see the connecting vowel and the primary endings, because again there's no augment. Augments signal secondary endings. So the paradigm, thais all the way down for tense formatives. Connecting vowel pattern is normal. My psi tai, metha setha entai. Again, the second singular. In the personal ending, the sigma is between an epsilon and an alpha. It drops out. Epsilon and alpha become eta and the iota subscripts. Think about the second future passive. Again, no tense augment here. Tense formative is just ace. Do you see the pattern? For the futures, first future is thais, second future is ace. The aorist, the first aorist is thay, second aorist is a. So from first to second, each loses a letter, and they're fairly similar. You'll get this down. Theis, eis, they, a, from future to aorist here. And the paradigm of second future, again, similar situation with the second singular. In the personal ending, the sigma drops out, epsilon and alpha become eta, iota subscripts, apostolese for the second singular. Master verb chart is growing, and we are now at the point where, just as it is the case with the primary and secondary endings for active and the middle passive, need to have those down. This chart, the more quickly you can memorize, especially the tenses that use an augment, the tense-foratives that occur for certain words, or tense stems rather, and the words that correspond there, and the connecting vowel patterns, have those middle columns down, and you're going to be down the road. Some vocab work here. I'm just starting you again. The more creative that you can get, the more quickly you can review these, the more consistently you can review them, the better off you're going to be. I trust you heard that in my voice, in Bill Mounce's voice, and others. Greek, like any language, takes time, consistency, and repetition. If you have those three things, you're going to make it, and you're going to need that as we move from verbs here in the indicative to participles, which are just around the corner, and then the other moods, the imperative, the infinitive, and so on. A good bit more to memorize, but you're moving along. So here are some words this week. Ago. The stem ag, I think of I go. That's what it just sounds like to me. Ago, I go. I lead. Ago. I go ahead, or I lead. Chyma, hematology, blood, study of blood. Chymaton, or excuse me, chymation. Chymation is how it would be pronounced. The rough breathing mark, chym, mot, is the emphasized syllable. Chymation. Sounds a little bit to me like his mat. His mat. He may use his coat or his garment as a mat. His mat. Chymaton. Just a mnemonic device or a memory device there by way of how chymation sounds. His mat. The rough breathing mark. Chi and mat. His mat, a cloak or garment. These kinds of words pictures can be very helpful, and I trust this one will. You'll think of others. Best wishes to you. Keep pressing on.